Welcome to our National Quilter Circle live event for today. We are going to be working on a table runner that is called Shamrock Shenanigans. So we're going to have some fun creating a St. Patrick's Day kind of theme because of the fabric in it. Again, if you watched me last time, we talked about what a pattern being evergreen means, that it can be used with a wide variety of genre fabrics. This is one you can adapt to a lot of different kind of colorways and themes because the shamrock part of it is in the fabric, but not in the actual design. So this again would be an evergreen kind of pattern that you can repurpose or reuse in other colorways. So if you haven't already, in the comments, you'll see the download, so that if you haven't downloaded the pattern already, go ahead and do that. We are advancing technology, so we are now into the QR code world. So if you see the QR code on the screen at different times during our video, take your phone in the camera mode and go over that QR code. And as it comes up, then the camera will grab that image and take you right to the pattern. So how much fun is that? You don't have to follow links and things anymore. That QR code is going to be your quick and fast way to the pattern. If this is new to you, I understand. The first time I did something with a QR code, I was like, what? My phone is going to know where to go. And it does. As soon as it grabs that image, it knows, oh, you want me to go here. Wonderful technology out there available to us. And now we're using it too. So that QR code will appear at the bottom of the screen as it is right now. So you can follow that. Or if you would rather go to the download that's in the chat and go the old way through it, that's fine too. But more than one way to do everything here at National Quilter Circle. So as we begin with that pattern, we're going to be working with what we call a diagonal set today. The pieces are assembled in diagonal rows. And as I bring in our project here, one block is this. So we're going to make 3 of these blocks. And they are put together in diagonal rows like this, so that we can then put in those quarter squares and half square triangles on the outer edge, which makes it kind of have a little bit of whimsy to it instead of trying to have everything totally square. We're working with squares and rectangles, but we're going to have some fun with this diagonal setting. So if you haven't done diagonal set yet in your quilting adventures, you will be exposed to that and how we cut those pieces properly to get the straight of grain, or the grain line on the outer edge of our blocks, to give them a lot of stability, and why we cut them that way. So we are going to be picking a variety of fabrics. Now, I fell in love with this plaid fabric. If you haven't followed me much, you will eventually learn that whenever I can find a plaid or a stripe, I will use it in a project. If they are perfectly straight, that's okay with me. This one did happen to be something that I wanted to cut fairly straight, and I cut it lengthwise. So when you're buying stripes or plaids, always buy a little extra fabric, because you may decide to cut, instead of width of fabric, you may decide to cut length of fabric. Okay, we've got a good morning from Wisconsin. So wonderful that Lisa's following us. We've got Bridget from France, sunny France. Oh, I wish I was in France. Someday I'm going to get there to meet you in person, maybe. And we have Patty says the code was strange to me. And at first, it was to me too. I kept thinking, how in the world do those little pattern of dots mean something? Well, it was the same way when scanner codes first came out, and that was a long, long time ago. And I couldn't understand how little stripes could take us and read a certain way. But the computers are wonderful, so that QR code will take you right to the pattern. So if you see it pop up again there at the bottom of the screen, you can use that to get you to the pattern. The plaid was the very first fabric that I found. And then the shamrock print, which I fell in love with, has that lime green, apple green, a really traditional St. Patrick's Day color, and then kind of a blue green in it too. So with the plaid, these two I found, and I just had to take them home didn't have a plan, didn't know where I was going with it, but made sure that I bought enough so that I could play with it a little. And then I found in my stash, a lot of you have been stash shopping. I know you have, because you're like me, you squirreled fabric away. So this allowed me to buy 2 pieces and then use 2 from my stash. So I went looking for that dark green, found a very simple modeled, really dark green, because we always have to have that depth of value in there, and then kind of a medium green. But all this color was going to need something to kind of brighten it up. So I went in and found a white on white. And this one actually has kind of a checkerboard. I don't know if the camera will be able to pick it up. It's a white on white that looks like a woven, and it just gives texture to it. Not a lot. It's very subtle, but sometimes we just need something bright against all those darks to give us the effect that we want. So that's when Shamrock Shenanigans got its life and how it started. So we're going to be cutting pieces today. As we take out our fabrics and cut, you'll see that a lot of time in this pattern, I tried to get to a number that was very easy, very common for us to cut. So 2.5-inch strips, if you happen to have leftover strips, maybe from a pre-cut, this would work for that, are using pieces from that. So the pieces that we're cutting, well, just to back up really quick, whenever I try to write patterns and how to sequence the writing, I usually try to have you cut the biggest piece first. So off of the white, I have you cut the 4.25-inch pieces. Those are going to be part of those quarter square triangles that we're going to use on the outer edge of our block. Then there are, let's see, do I have some small ones? Oh, they're underneath. Here we go. We have 2.5-inch pieces, that really common number. Then we got 2.25-inch. So make sure that you notice the difference between the 2.5 and the 2.25. Pick up the right one. Make sure you really follow your pattern closely, because these are going to be cut for the outer corners, these little tiny triangles that go out here on the outer edge. And then we're going to be cutting some dark, medium and dark squares in the greens. Those are 2.5. See how the easy cutting there is. The bars that are the shamrock print, 2.5 by 6.5. So all that's listed in your pattern. If you need to make sure you make piles, what I usually do is put all the lights together in one spot, and then my others right near it, so that I can then just easily assemble what I'm going to be creating. So the very center portion of our block, bring it out here. Now, you have to remember, working on point, okay? And now as I look at that, I did assemble that wrong. Oh my gosh. Okay, bear with me today. The center portion right here is a 9 patch. A simple 9 patch with light in the corners, a dark on each side, and then that medium green in the very center. And look what I did yesterday. I put it together wrong. So a 9 patch with, repeat as you do it, light on the corners, light on the corners. See how easy it is to twist what you think you know and put it together in the wrong order. So here we go. Now you can see just how human this quilter really is. Light on the corners. We have that medium green in the center. And then we are putting the darkest green on the sides. I call those the side positions. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. And if you're working with a print that is very saturated, make sure you have the right side up positioned. And then you will be putting together a 9 patch for the very center of your block. So easy sewing, right sides together. I usually work kind of in a column. Everybody kind of works a different way. Some people like to put together horizontal rows. Some people like to do vertical rows. I think it has something to do with how our brain is hardwired, but making sure we keep things in order as we go. We have a hello from Virginia, from West Palm Beach, Florida. I bet it's gorgeous there right now. We are gearing up for freezing rain and snow tomorrow. So hello, Florida. And Mark, I think this is Mark, says hello from Seattle. And then we have a hello from Washington State from just A. Okay, we're glad that you're here to join us today. We're going to be putting together our 9 patch. So I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and trying not to switch the pieces around as you get there. I'd like to have them kind of marching into the sewing machine so that I can put them together and not twist them around. I guess my mantra yesterday should have been light on the corner, light on the corner, light on the corner. Is even when you've made something, trying to repeat it sometimes is an interesting choice. Remember where to put the lights and darks, because the idea is it kind of weaves through the block. Now I'm chain piecing these one after the other so that they're kind of hooked together. And I'll show you what I mean by that here in a second as I take it out of the machine. Try to get my best 1/4 inch seam going there. Now, I like to use a spider on this machine. A spider doesn't mean something crawling on the wall, though you might find one in my house. It means a little scrap of fabric I run off and on so that I don't leave a puddle of thread in my piecing, because my machine tends to has a little bit of issue with creating kind of a puddle of fabric in there. Okay, so in order to keep it nice and neat and tidy, now you can see that mine are chained together kind of like a little laundry line, like they're hanging on the clothesline. So we're going to put the dark seam allowance, press the seam allowance toward the darker fabric. That middle one is, the darker fabric is the one on the outside edge. And then this piece, I'm going to finger press these right now, taking it to the iron next. So after we put a little piece, more piecing together, right sides together, white on white is always tricky, making sure that we have the correct side facing down. There we go. And now I'm going to take this whole thing over. Now, the problem is sometimes moving this means things want to shift out of place. So a simple pin just to kind of tack it in place so that it won't shift on me. So then I can slide it to the sewing machine. It may be a walk to your sewing machine. So those pins do hold everything in place. And it also will tell you what the right side up is. Now we just feed through the next set of seams, jumping from one piece to the next. Take out the pin and just adjust to make sure that our pieces are aligned. The first few times I did this, I thought, nice. It did keep everything in place. And some people will call it booking because it creates kind of a hinge between rows and keeps everything aligned nicely. Okay, so we've got our first 2 rows. Take my spider out, putting back under there. Now, again, press the seam allowance toward the darker fabric. So I'm just going to finger press quickly and then take it over to the iron next, making sure you flip those in the right direction. Now, pattern out of the way. Now you'll see that everything is hooked together. Nothing can get out of order now. So we'll take it over to the ironing board, our pressing surface, and bring in our iron, making sure it's hot. Do we have any other questions? Someone says, I love the quilt motif used in the white on the runner. The white on the runner, there is a motif on it, but there's also quilting on it, which we will look at the end, because I wanted to add some more texture to it. So we'll take a peek at how I quilted that white section at the end of our construction, because sometimes I just get tired of meandering and want to do something different. So it was really a decision. I did do some quilting that I took out and came back and did something else. So it's always kind of a choice of the quilter, what ends up being in those areas that maybe we want to have recede or push down. So, okay, Chris says, hello from Battle Creek, Michigan. Wonderful. And we have Leona says, hi from sunny, cold Manitoba. Ooh, there's our Canadian connections. We always have quilters from all over the world. It's wonderful to see you with us today. Okay, now that we have these hinged together, We know exactly where we're going to sew next. So easily putting right sides together. Those seams will lock up now because we did press seams toward the darker fabric. So we can quickly do that last set of seams. And then we're going to get into the rest of our construction, which is fairly easy. I did label each of the sections A, B, C, D. I don't always do that, but in this case, it was kind of like we're breaking up the sewing so that it makes it easier to understand. And if you are a new quilter, that would help you with the assembly. So I do remember those days when I was first starting out and didn't have a lot of classes and really kind of needed somebody to hold my hand through a pattern. And I was always happy when things were labeled well. So we have our center portion, the very center portion done now. And we will then look real quickly at what happens next. Okay, so we've got this portion, the 9 patch ready to go, pressed toward the darker fabric. I'm just going to do this by hand for now, and so we can get to the rest of the construction that we need to work on. So we would take that to the ironing or the pressing board, press it hot, get it the seam in its stitched position warm, then open it up and press the seam allowance toward the darker of the fabrics. And then we have our 9 patch center. The next step we need to do is to make add the B units. And those are very simple. It's 2 starting V's, rectangles, side to side. That's simple sewing. Putting those right sides together, stitching a 1/4 inch seam, opening out and pressing the seam allowances toward the outer edge because those seam allowances they're crossing aren't going to want to fold back on themselves. So it's always best to press away from those so that you have a nice flat block. So by adding those to the sides, we've got 2 sides done. Now we're going to go on to creating the pieces that go on the next 2 sides because we need to build around as we go. So the next 2, what we need to do is I need to put 1 here and 1 here. But I need to fill in some pieces here. And that's where our 1/4 square triangles come into play. So let's put this up and out of the way for now. We need to add kind of like wings on each of these pieces. And I have one already assembled. So when I talk about wings, this is what we're creating, kind of like bookends to each of these rectangles. And the way that we go about doing that is to take those 4 1/4 inch squares that you cut earlier. I did tell you to cut them diagonal in both directions. What I mean by that is to take your ruler, cut corner to corner across one way, don't disturb the block, and then cut it the opposite direction. We're cutting it into like an X across the block. So we're going to create these. These are now 1/4 squares because they're 1/4. Each is a 1/4 of a square. The idea by cutting them this way is that the bias edge is on the inside here. This is all grain line on the outer edge. And grain line gives us stability. The idea is that we want to have stability because what we're trying to do is, well, here, I guess, create this piece. And we want stability on the outer edge of our block. Yes, there are bias edges, but those bias edges are going next to a grain line, or grain line edge. So that gives them some stability. Not as much stability as 2 pieces of grain line joined together, but at least you're putting 1 grain line to 1 bias edge. So what we need to do to create that is gently handle these. We don't want to distort them because, like I said, you have bias edge there. If you haven't worked with bias edge very much before, you can always use a bit of a spray starch, a sizing, something added to the fabric, sprayed on or misted on before you cut the 4 1/4 inch square. That will give the fibers just a little bit more structure so that you can handle them and not distort them. It's always kind of a go-to whenever there's a bias edge involved. But we're going to be using 2 of those quarter square triangles, and we're going to put one on each end of our rectangle. Let me put it so that we can see what we're doing. That bookends like this are going to go on each end, so that you know this right angle where all those bias edges are. We're going to attach at least one of those biases to the end of the rectangle, and that will give it some stability there. So right sides together. Make sure that you have right side of fabric facing the right side of fabric facing. White on white is always tricky until you get it into the bright light where you can see more of the ink. And I'm going to stitch on both ends. Okay. Now, making sure we use our best 1/4 inch seam. Oh, there's a spider under there first. Okay. You are going to have a dog ear that will hang off one edge as you attach this, so don't worry that you haven't placed it properly. That is there. That's going to be trimmed eventually, so don't worry about it. If you go to sew and you go, oh, why is this sewing off in just one layer? That's okay. That's how it's supposed to be placed. And then we're going to flip around. We're going to sew the other side. If you were making all 3 of the blocks at once, you could chain piece by adding one after the other. But since we're working on just one square here, I'm just going to flip it around and do the other side so we can see how this looks once we start to assemble our block. Okay. Get all of our little tails of thread out of the way. Now, you do want to take this to press it. And again, very gently, because you do have some bias edges there. Press the pieces flat first, and then press the pieces so that the seam allowance goes toward the darker fabric. It's going to finger press it gently so that I can come back with the iron and hit both ends. But now try not to overwork these because you do have that bias edge there. Okay. Virginia says, I don't have a machine that, I can't read all of it. Sorry, my bifocals are stretched today, that sinks into a cabinet. Not all of us do. This just happens to be the luck of the draw on this one. I have a machine upstairs that sits on top of a cabinet, but it has a large surround plate that goes onto it. So I do have some flat surface there. If you can achieve that, it's nice to have that flat surface around than to work on that little ridge of just the surround, the piece that comes with the machine. So that was always my goal, to get something that where my machine was down in and I could work better on a flat surface. Things slide under the needle a lot easier. So I do understand that concept. Okay, so now we've made the other side. So we've got our wings on here. It doesn't matter which direction you start with because they're all going to be assembled the same way, and then they can be rotated onto the block. So here we go. Now in our assembly, let me pull this back. We've got the 9 patch in the center. We've got the B rectangles on each side. We've then constructed the C rectangles with the wings. So we have one on each end, like this, and one like this. And then you say, but that's still not the block that you constructed. We have 4 more pieces that we need to create. So if you look in your instructions, there is the D unit that we need to create. So we need to slide this guy out of the way. We'll wait for the rest of his buddies to come along. We need to create the corner pieces because this is actually a square on point. So we need 4 of these to go with it. So those are constructed. Here's my flannel board back out. We are using one of the dark squares. We are going to use 2 more of those quarter square triangles, like this. and a half square triangle. Remember those little tiny ones I said they were 2 1/4 inch? Those little guys are cut in half once, corner to corner, and you get these little guys. And that will go on the very end. So in your diagram, it shows something that looks like this. Again, the construction is similar to our last step. We had that rectangle in the center. This time we just have a square in the center. So we put one on at a time. You have to make sure that you move a triangle out of the way as you construct this. So let's do the actual construction of this portion. Let's see what we've got here. Oh, I can't take a phone call right now. Isn't that nice? At least I have people who want to talk to me. We'll talk to people. We're talking to quilters right now. So Diane says it's best to sew with the bias on the bottom. That is a very good tip if you have issues with anything pushing or shoving out of and being distorted. I have my presser foot set just a little bit less pressure so that it doesn't stretch that bias. So if you have at all issues with any kind of distortion with the presser foot, you can put the bias edge on the bottom as it feeds through to see if that helps you and assists you in the piecing portion of this. So good tip. Thank you for adding that. Every machine works a little bit differently. So we do sometimes need to adjust our techniques to fit the machine that we're using. So, okay, I've got one triangle on the side here. I'm just going to lightly finger press this so that we can put the second one in place. And as we put these together, remember that there's a straight line along the widest portion here. So if you're worried about how you're positioning your triangle, say if you're thinking, do I put it on this direction? No, it needs to look like that bookend that we created with the other. So right sides together, taking it to the machine, and then we only have one more short seam to put together. Now, when you look at the overall table runner, as I was assembling it, I was thinking, why didn't I just make rows all the way across the table runner in diagonals instead of making block to block? Well, the rationale came out that I wanted to give you, if you look in the pattern, other settings with more blocks and possible sashing included. So I just made individual blocks and wrote the pattern for individual blocks. There's always multiple ways of putting things together. Okay, I'm going to take this to the iron and give it just a nudge of a press so that it lays flat on our design board here. And that goal is to have that piece be nice and straight and be able to have a straight line along the bottom and not be distorted. One more piece that needs to be put on is that little triangle that goes in the corner. And sometimes placing that can be kind of an issue. What you can do is that you can eyeball it, or you can fold the piece in half to find the center of that green portion of the square. So you have a fold mark there. You can fold the triangle then also. Just give it a quick pinch so it has a little groove there, and then lay the grooves one on top of the other for perfect placement. After you do a few of these, you tend to kind of get an idea of where it goes. But on those first few, by doing that simple little fold and find the center, you'll have it perfectly placed. Again, you're going to have dog ears that hang off the corners as you put this together. That's okay. Those are going to get trimmed in the end. So you haven't done anything wrong. Okay, let's take this guy out and take away some of our messy threads. This machine tends to leave long tails behind. It does a thread cut, but the thread cut is kind of long and cumbersome. There we go. Now we're going to open that little triangle outward, pressing that seam also. Doesn't want to lay flat unless he's actually pressed. So we're going to gently go in. The straight of grain is on the outer short legs of that triangle. So he has stability. He just needs a quick press to give him kind of a, this is where you belong kind of thought. There we go. And now we have the outer corner pieces. Okay. We have another questions as we're working here. Diane says it's best. No, that was a song at the bias on the bottom. So I guess we've got MJ from Alberta, Canada. Glad that you're with us today. Let's see, is there anything else? That's pretty much covers it. Okay, I can go back under here and take away all of those extra layers underneath I don't need. The dog ears here, those little tips that are coming out, those are going to be trimmed in the very end of this process because these are oversized just a bit so that you can trim the block to make it really pretty when you're done. So we lay this together as close to simulating as we can here. There we go. Whoops, this has got to go out so we get the white on the corners. It's my mantra for the day, white on the corners. When I said it this way, it looks like a square block you'd be putting in, but actually what we're going to do is put it on point. Remember, on point. So that means that these little pieces go out here. See how this dark green starts to create a weave through the block? That is the fun part. When I was trying to design something, I was like, oh, I really want the color to kind of weave through. And then we have created this block. Like that. So set on point, we have the Shamrock Shenanigans ready to put together. Now, when you're putting these together, just real quick tips. You're going to have opposing seams here so that you know where your block is placed. You'll have opposing seams here with the seams here. So they'll have nowhere to put those. And then when it comes to putting on the outer corners, the best thing you can do for yourself is to find the center and the center of the green here. Hopefully everything is aligned perfectly. That's why that really accurate 1/4 inch seam comes into play. When a fabric kind of does kind of a weave from one block to the next, it's nice to have that kind of assurance that everything will line up. The other thing you can do is once this is joined, as you lay this on top, trying to figure out where, the center, you can do the fold for the center, but you can also look for the seam line here matching up with seam lines here, knowing then that they will kind of jump from one to the other and create that straight line that weaves through the block where this won't shift and have a jump from one piece to the next. So by folding them over, you can kind of use the guidelines from your 9 patch to line up seams here across the block also. So there's more than one way to double check yourself to make sure that you stay accurate. Okay. Someone asked, is there back stitching on each piece? No. In the quilt world, I shouldn't say that. When I first started quilting, I did back stitch because I came to quilting with a garment sewing background, and we always secured our seams as we began each seam and ended each seam. But in quilting, we skinny down those stitch length to 2.0, which is shorter than in garment sewing. So we have a shorter stitch length, and we don't back stitch usually at the beginning or end of anything, because we're going to cross that seam with another seam before we're finished. And that kind of secures the seam from raveling out or pulling or popping. So in most, I would say 99.9% of quilters do not backstitch. There are always instances where you might, but in the majority of patchwork, we don't backstitch, because the more buildup of thread that we have as a seam begins, it will create a difference in the fold out as our pieces go together. So if I were to backstitch here and here, it would take up just a bit of space as as I'm opening up my piece, and I may distort my block in the end. So that thickness of backstitch isn't really an appropriate use in most piecing. as I've crossed one seam, this seam with this. When I get done, I'm going to be putting borders on the outside of my block. So again, I'm going to be crossing seams. So backstitch is usually not used in quilting. Okay, once you have your block constructed, your outer edge may be a bit uneven. That's normal. I did oversize the quarter squares just a bit. If you follow me at all, you know that I like to oversize a little and trim down and make sure I have enough fabric. So going back, you would then take a ruler on the outer edge and ensure that you have a 1/4 inch seam from your intersections. And you will be trimming off just a tiny, once that's actually seamed there, it's just going to be a little tiny bit to make sure your outer edge is straight. So it's easier to have just a little bit more. So remember that clean up on the outer edge to make sure that you have a 1/4 inch from your points to the cut edge. Then you can clean up that outer edge of the block. After you have your blocks constructed, there is a simple border that I put on. And as I was working on this, I was like, if I cut those 1 inch wide, well, this is where the accuracy in your 1/4 inch seam is really important. I cut these at 1 inch, which means that by the time I take both of my seam allowances out, I'm only going to have a 1/2 inch left. So we're putting narrow borders on. And the diagrams in your instructions will tell you which ones to put on first. And then the plaid is my outer edge. Now, plaid is fun, right? We love plaid, but when it comes to corners, what do we do with plaid? That became an issue. So to solve my issue with my plaid corner, because I didn't want to, trying to match an uneven plaid is next to impossible. So I have borders going on the outer edge of my block and what to do here. So it's easily just a cornerstone, solves the issue completely. So you don't have to worry about matching plaids, matching stripes, or doing a mitered corner of some sort. But on an uneven plaid, that's next to impossible. So simple cornerstone treatment was my solution to using those plaids on an outer border. And then you come back with the dark green as your binding. Now, all that said, let's take this out. Where are we at on time? We're pretty good. And I don't see any other questions popping up. So let's take a look. Oh, one other thing I wanted to remind you is from last year we did, if you're looking for any other St. Patrick's Day themed patterns, we did placemats last year called Shamrock Stars. So I believe our moderator will put up the link for Shamrock Stars if you're looking for another idea of something to do for St. Patrick's Day. These are quite quick. You could even eliminate, if you don't want to put the shamrock on there, just do it all in green and white, and you would have an easy, quick placemat idea for St. Patrick's Day. Now, when it comes to the quilting, that's always the proverbial question. What do I do when I get done with my project and I don't know how to quilt it? Because I even stare at my own projects sometimes and go, what do you want? What do you need to finish you off? So the shamrock portion, I just did an outline because I didn't want to disrupt the shamrocks. I used a dark green thread. I did about a 1/4 to a 3/8 inch wide outline on those blocks and left the rest of it because I just wanted the shamrocks to be kind of the showcase of the story here. Then in that white background, if I hold it correctly, I think you can pick up. I did channel quilting really close together and it was free motion. So what I was doing was basically like scribbling back and forth. I chose a diagonal and kept all the white pieces quilted in the same direction. So out here, it's white, it's a cream on white, so you don't see the stitching much. I just went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. When I got to the triangle, I traveled to the next, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So that it's very close together. It's probably about I don't know, maybe an eighth of an inch to a quarter inch. And so all of the white pieces have the same quilting. They all go in one diagonal across the quilt. Let's see. I did do stitch in the ditch around pieces so that it would hold things down. So all of this is outlined first with a color thread that would just kind of sink into the seams or into the ditch so it wouldn't show up. And then when I finished, I decided that the dark green pieces, they needed something on them too. So I'm not sure if the lighting will pick up. I just did 2 channels down through with a matching thread down across those. So I put a ruler down across the green because I wanted them to look like they were continuous. So I marked, let's see, I guess I did about 5/8 of an inch in, used a chalk liner to mark across, and then from the other side, same thing, marked, and then just did simple channel quilting with a wider channel there. I did cross through the center, so it kind of has a boxed look on the very center piece there. But sometimes the quilting doesn't have to be excessive. Other times you get off on a roll and you just keep quilting. The plaid on the outer edge. Now, since I'd done this much quilting on the inside, that plaid border kind of seemed wimpy on the outside. It needed some quilting. And again, I'm one who doesn't want to disturb the plaid. So what I did is I found matching thread and I literally just followed the plaid. And then every once in a while, I took a dark color thread and I followed the dark lines and hid my quilting in the printed portion of the plaid because I want that plaid to be bold and speak as a frame around the table runner. So I hid my quilting, and it's not at an even interval. I just picked whatever the designer of the fabric had done. If I had a matching thread, I did a Kelly green in the Kelly green ones, and I did a really dark olive on the olive green color one. So that finished it off. And then since all of that fun shamrock fabric, I had some extra left, I wanted just to put it on the back and let it have a fun, bright, cheery background to it. So that is Shamrock Shenanigans. We will be back in a few weeks with another project. So remember, download the pattern, maybe even download the one for Shamrock Stars. Have some fun. Remember, you can use your QR code with your phone to take a link by opening up your phone and your camera. It can shoot that QR code and it'll take you right to the pattern. So we are so glad you joined us today. Have a happy St. Patrick's Day coming up in March. Thanks for joining me today.